Welcome, everyone. Starting to see some people pull through to the call. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. Saoirse, how you going? Some familiar names in here. Alrighty. How's everyone going? How's the start of the year? I've had a lot of conversations so far this year. It feels like it's been quite a busy start to January. Yeah, we've been pretty under the pump with the recent migration work, but a lot of industries I'm seeing the same thing. It's a good problem to have. Good problem to have. We'll just wait for a couple more people to filter through, and we'll get started for today. Really excited to talk about um, this piece here. Have a lot of conversations about it on a frequent basis with our customers, and it's a sneaky one. It is a bit of a sneaky one. Um, Outside of that, anyone watching anything good? Had some suggestions last time for Ted Lasso, but haven't got round to it. Couple in there. Severance is kind of pretty good. Boys Follows Universe. Interesting. Heard that one's quite good. Alrighty. Well, wait about 30 more seconds. I know what it's like. As I said, it is a busy time of year, so just wait a couple more seconds for people to filter through. Louder Milk on Netflix. Okay. Always love a good suggestion. I'll have to try that one out. Alrighty. Look, I think we'll get started. Thanks everyone for joining today to talk about reducing business expenditure in 2024. I'm your host. Some of you may know me. I work with you on a one-to-one basis, but I'm part of the success team at Weel. A bit of background in public practice, and I used to work at Xero. So through that journey, I've really started to understand, where these hidden costs can be, and I'm excited to talk a bit about it today. Before we get started, just a bit of housekeeping. So the session's going to be recorded and it will be shared. So we'll make sure to do that. So if any questions, we are going to share the recording. And I just suggest any questions, do it through the Q&A function rather than chat, because it allows me to be able to get to it. I can sort of swan it a bit more. So Q&A function, not chat, for any queries throughout the session. Alrighty. So for today, we're going to be looking at fixed recurring expenditure in a pretty broad capacity. We're going to be looking at hidden spending. Where is it? How to find it? Identifying the common pitfalls that lead to overspend. And again, I think these are pretty broad terms, but it will be very helpful with the time of year. And then how to audit and optimize to save a bit of dollars. Now, I've been saying this for a while. I've got a gym membership. I'm paying for it, but I'm not losing any weight. So how are we going to identify and cut out all the costs that we don't need? All righty. So we'll get stuck in. We do have a poll for the webinar today. And really what we're thinking about is when the last time that you reviewed your recurring expenditure, thinking about subscriptions, any of those direct debits. And when I think about reviewing it, it may not be just, okay, here's what we have, but it could be negotiating. It could be saying, okay, well, what's the current rates that the organization is paying? What is the increased usage that we've had over the past 12 months, which might substantiate a different payment plan. So that as a holistic, when was the last time we reviewed our recurring expenses? Okay, you got a couple of a fair few responses coming through. Give it a second and all righty. So looks like there is quite a few people that it might have been more than 12 months, which is okay. It's okay. I do see that a lot. at the end of the day, we've got a lot of pots on the stove, and it can be quite difficult for us to, if it's not really the highest flame, to put our time and resources there. But this is why we're having the conversation today. So moving into recurring expenditure as a pretty broad conversation. What is recurring expenditure? I'm sure we all know what it is, but really to highlight it and bring it down to brass tacks is we're talking about expenses automatically deducted from your bank balance. So we're thinking subscriptions. It might be your accounting software. It could be Adobe. It could be MailChimp. It could be a whole variety of different fixed recurring that are debited on a particular month. Now, why is it worth us talking about recurring expenditure? Well, a lot of the times with these debits is they are set and forget. And they're designed for convenience. So you may not have the opportunity to review it on a regular basis, but they tick away in the background. They're always sort of just going along every month. And it hits a point where you need to review it because it could be hindering your business growth. It may not be convenient for us to be on top of everything, but if we've done a review, we've done an audit, we know that our resources are most effectively allocated. So it really is at that point of business where it could be, you might be a startup where you need to make sure that every business dollar counts. It could be a scale up where you need to make sure that you've got internalized documents and processes for monitoring this spend and make sure it's used effectively. Or it could be a mature business where, it is easier for things to slip through the cracks. With these fixed recurring expenditure debits, it's not exclusive. It's going to be cross-departmental. Everyone's going to have different subscriptions they need to get the job done, and we really want to make the most bang for our buck. And the last thing I want to talk about is why. I think it's pretty common that at the beginning of the year, we take stock during potentially quieter periods to review our tech stack. And some of the reasons why we want to be looking at this now is one, you might have annual contract agreements that are coming towards their end, or you might want to start to, put in place the process for auditing these fixed recurring expenditure debits prior to the end of financial year. So it gives us a fair bit of time so that we are on the best foot forward moving into 2025. So these are some of the reasons why we want to do it. Is one, it can be hidden. Two, it's going to happen everywhere. We need to make sure that we need to effectively allocate our resources. And finally, it's probably the time of year to do it. If it's a bit less busy, contracts are coming to the end. So what are the pitfalls of hidden spending to watch? So not regularly negotiating on price. As I said, with these direct debits, they tick away in the background. You may get notice of a price increase, but in the long scheme of things, you may not have had an opportunity to really go into the detail of why we're spending so much in a particular area. Think about it from a personal perspective as well. In your career, you might be negotiating salary. That should be done on a fairly frequent basis, and it sort of needs to be that same relationship with different vendors. We need to make sure we're getting the most bang for our buck. Next point that we have is double ups on the same or similar tools across departments. Now, I've seen this time and time again, particularly when I've worked with customers. It could be that, two different divisions have similar or the same tools paid for direct debits as a subscription. And really, one, you're doubling up on the cost for that particular subscription. But two, what it does is it hinders point one. We can't negotiate a better price because we don't actually have the full scope of what we're using it for, how much we're spending with the vendor. And we can't say, hey, look, this is the scope of work we're doing. These are all the requirements that we have. We are giving you a fair bit of business. What can we do to come to the table and negotiate on the price? So that's where the double ups can really hinder. And you do start to see that in particular the startups, scale ups points, even maturity for that point, where there isn't necessarily that communication. Probably could get worse as you move into maturity and you got higher head counts. So again, double ups, same tools, a pitfall. Now, getting stung with high FX fees on USD payments. Look, a lot of these subscriptions are going to be US based. So when we are making that payment through any sort of bank provider, generally it's going to be 3%. Now, if we're paying an enterprise agreement, it could be $50,000 a month. That is quite a significant difference if you're going to be paying through a 3% to comparison to a less than a percent. That could be $1,500 a month in FX payments, which could be diverted back into the business. So really, again, it's good to take stock, make sure that we are getting the most bang for our buck, but what are ways that we can manage that spend to save us a little bit of extra money? And finally, lack of visibility, which subscriptions are actively being used. I think this is also quite common as we grow. We might set up something, and that at that point in time, it's really, really helpful, gets the job done, but it might fall a bit to the wayside. So we need to make sure that everything we do have is being used effectively. Resource allocation is top notch. And that lack of visibility is also quite a difficulty if you try to make any changes. If we've got all of our direct debits running through one potential card, you don't know what's going through it necessarily. And then on the flip side is, if we don't have the capacity to make changes on that quickly, or the card gets cancelled at the drop of a hat, there could be, missed payments to suppliers. So that's another reason why lack of visibility can be really difficult and constrain relationships with vendors. So how can we audit and optimize to drive subscription spend further? Following the paper trail. Now, I think this is a really helpful place to start. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a think about, okay, how do we start the process? And then moving towards, these negotiations for a new contract, or moving towards a new financial year, we'll have a process to follow. Follow the paper trail, use bank statements, use any potential asset or expense accounts that you're using in your accounting software. Understand what is flowing out. Do you have a particular card that each of the subscription rolls through? And then what you can start to do is document them in one place. Now, this list becomes very important because as we start to have conversations internally, and as I said, it could be something that might have been outdated. It gives us a bit of a list to sort of dot all the I's and cross all the T's. Now, the next thing would be is to review each contract in place with vendors to make sure that we have a great starting point to understand, what was agreed to in the first place. And if you do decide to go through that negotiation process, what do you want to end up with? Because whenever you start a negotiation, you always want to know potentially where you want to end with that conversation. Okay, so start with the paper trail. Next, find your source of truth. Who owns the subscription? And that's a really big one. We need to make sure that someone is in charge of compliance, particularly if they're large outflows of cash, that we're getting the tax invoices, that we have delegated responsibilities. And the reason why is it always comes back to accountability. At the end of the day, in any business, the buck's got to end somewhere. So does every subscription have a clear owner? And why that's important is because one subscription might have been set up when someone was at the business, but they may exit the business, and we don't have that sort of next in line. Who's responsible for reviewing the monthly total? Again, I think that comes back to that accountability piece. It could be a joint consideration between finance teams, procurement, anything like that, and the division head that owns that particular subscription. But it's good to have that in place while we start to move to looking at these fixed recurring debits. And then finally, where are the different subscriptions tracked? So realistically, in this day and age, you can go for a full encompassing suite of spend management tools in Weel. We've got your AP, your reimbursements, your cards, and subscription management in one place. But there are many providers as well that help you track just your subscriptions. So there is lots of different tools out there. And that's something to evaluate when you find your source of truth is, do we need to go anywhere as well? So moving into the third point is diving into the data. Once you've got this information, you can build your spreadsheet. You know who you're making payments to, you know what you're making payments for. Is it in line with the original contract? You can look at the monthly spending trends and any changes to that. So any aberrations. Do we need to maximize our asset allocation from here? And again, looking at that FX rate, if we're paying at 3% for all of these USD transactions, what's the annual spend reduction if we look at an alternative? So again, once you've got your paper trail, once you've got your sources of truth, you combine it, you get it in one place, and you can synthesize the data more accurately. And that just, like anything, lets us make better, concise decisions. Okay. So automating our processes. As I mentioned, where can technology help? Once we've gone through this process, you might have that conversation with team members to say, hey, look, we hadn't used this in 10 months, like my gym membership. And do we need to get rid of this? If we're saving that extra $5, $10, $20,000 a year, what are the different tools where we can maximize the efficiency from? Where can we drive that saving in cost to make our lives easier and everyone's lives easier in general? What tools can help keep everyone accountable? Again, it comes back to that piece of where does the buck end? And how are we going to manage these subscriptions moving forward? What's taking up the most time? Again, once we go through this process, you might start to see trends through the synthesized data that shows, okay, well, these particular divisions need help, or on the opposite, you might see there's trends where we have a lack of investment into particular divisions. So it could be what's taking up the most time in contrast with where don't we have investment. We can start to make decisions based off that. Like anything in business, all decisions need to be accurate and timely. So how much time are we spending managing subscriptions as a whole? Again, I think particularly, I'm sure a lot of people on the call will agree, we set up subscriptions for a lot of different divisions. Marketing might need X, sales might need Y, the engineering team might need Z. But there's a lot of times where we don't think about ourselves. And sometimes it's important to be selfish with your time. Because if you're spending too much time managing the subscriptions and you don't have a tech stack that helps you to do that, you're really shooting yourself in the foot. Because at the end of the day, there's sunk time administrative costs. What might be a really tedious process of managing it through a spreadsheet or anything like that, or the stress that's caused by not having it tracked, that can really impact where you spend your time. And I'm sure everyone would also agree that once we have this in one place, we've got that synthesized information. It's easy to make forward-thinking decisions. It's easier to go into sort of management reporting space of mind and say, okay, we have stock of where we're at. Where do we want to go? How do we get there? Let's spend our time thinking about taking the business forward, not just playing catch up. So I think thinking about your time, being a bit selfish where possible, is also a really important thought. So to wrap up, thinking about it, take stock of all the data going through the business, find your sources of truth, document it. Then what you want to do is dive into the data, synthesize it, create your lists, and then using that information, automate it, invest in your tech stack, make sure everyone's accountable. Where are you taking up time and where needs investment? And how can we be selfish with our time to make sure the business is taken to that next level as well? Okay. So once you've got your process sorted, we can find ways to automate and streamline what we're doing. If you've done at different levels, as we've talked about, don't be afraid to sort of delegate, bring people into the discussion. But that is sort of a way to approach in a very timely point of the year our fixed recurring expenditure. And I'll open it up for a bit of Q&A in the session. They said, can this be used on a broader scale? Are you trust set up? Yeah, I guess the broad principles would apply to anything from a business structure standpoint as well. Particularly with trusts, they can obviously get quite convoluted. So I'd say that following that paper trail, understanding what's going on and effectively allocating your resources would make a lot of sense in a trust setup as well. Thanks, Emily. Yes, we just introduced after lots of requests from our customers. We've moved to Visa, which means that we are less than a percent FX fees, which I said can add up. And I think one of the main things is knowing and taking stock of it. If we're okay with where it's at, we know that. But if the question's always, if the question's ever asked, you want the answer, and to have the backup to say, okay, well, this is where we're at, and this is why we're okay with it. So at the very least, doing that audit, understanding what's running through the business, super, super important. Yeah. Cool. So thinking about what we've learned today, unless there's any other questions, I do have another poll to introduce to talk about some of the abilities to manage your fixed recurring debits. Obviously, if you use Weel, please say I'd love someone to get in touch if you're not using our subscriptions tool. That way we can definitely get in contact and make sure you're maximizing the use out of Weel. If you've never heard about us and you want to sort of review, okay, well, Weel can issue virtual corporate cards, personal reimbursements, AP, subscriptions. It's that full all-in-one stack. Potentially just want to have a discussion and figure out if it is a good time to evaluate our suite of tools. We're happy to give some information as well. So please feel free to answer as you do, and we can help out from there. Now, I've worked with a lot of customers with moving subscriptions across to Weel. Obviously, that's something that I do with them. But time and time again, just for the value of the call, the two things I see that pop up the most is that maybe lapse of communication between departments where you doubled up and you're not able to negotiate better prices, or tools that haven't been used in about 8 months. So again, if we're taking anything from today, please, if you've got the time, you've got the ability, and you can check what's going through the business, it'll pay dividends, absolutely. Cool. So wrapping up today, thanks everyone for joining the call. Really appreciate everyone's time. Hope it's been valuable, and I'll speak to